Thank you for joining me today.
Oh, you're welcome.
We met at some point last year at my meetup, for mental health, and you shared your experience with the diet. You seem to be on it for long enough, 5 years or so, and you've been doing really well with it. I find this very fascinating and inspiring. So I thought that your journey and experience has been can be very valuable for someone who is maybe facing similar challenges and are not sure where to look for alternatives, maybe things that are out there are not working for them, and they're willing to hear what else is available for them. So I think that's where your personal experience can be really, really helpful. And I wanted to for you to share just what you've been through, your whole journey. I know you've been into health challenges for a while, and what led you here today, and the good and the bad stuff, the real life experience, really.
Sure. You can keep me on track if my sometimes disorganized thinking has me
It's a
wander
good
around a
question.
bit. But, you know, diet and wellness in general has been a huge part of my life, my identity, and passion. It's something that I love, and had strangely gotten into at a really, really young age. Even when I was in middle school and high school, I had some unhealth issues, and one of the things that I kind of radiated towards was like, self-empowerment or things I can do on my own, and diet was one of those things. So it's been something. I'm in my later 50s now, so it's been a long time since I've been endeavoring in those ways. So it's just something that I find fascinating, I find empowering. And that said, in terms of this particular way of eating, the ketogenic way of eating, and thinking about mind and body health, it was such a circuitous, interesting way I got to it, because it was really kind of, I have to say, counter to a lot of where I had been for a long period of time. Um, I've had a lot of success in alternative wellness and, Eastern systems and yoga and some of the eating ways around that, um, especially in this day and age, at least that I have been exposed to it, is also associated with um, the high carbohydrate diets of vegetarianism, for example, almost in a zealot or a religious way, that this is the best way, this is the healthiest way, this is the healthiest way. And I think it is immensely more healthy than a standard American sad overprocessed diet, for sure. Eating whole foods in that way, it does, at least from my perspective now, leave a lot of things out. And I had indicators of that along the way, um, in terms of my evolution towards figuring out what's the right way of eating for my brain, my body. But I did find it one of the harder things psychologically to do, to kind of move away from that vegetarianism, especially, and towards, for me, a lot more animal-based, ketogenic way of eating. And that's a big shift. And it was a lot easier for my body to shift in that way than it was my brain. Um, those are just some of the things that um, are initial kind of thoughts when I think about my experience, because it's only been about 5 years or so of really switching the gears and flipping over. Jumping ahead, the thing that really pushed me um, on this path was, um, like so many things in life, I'm sure people have experiences like this. It is strange how life kind of works out. But I found myself after having an accident. I had taken a pretty precarious fall from about 7 feet, and I fell in an inverted way on the back of my head, neck, and I did some damage to my spine, and I ruptured some neurology, what we call peripheral neurology, that comes off the spine and runs through the left arm. And so I had a palsy, a brachial plexus palsy. That's the name of the nerve, runs down the arm. I was paralyzed through my left arm, and highly motivated to try to see if that rupture of that neurology could be healed or repaired. And I was working with doctors, and I was facing some pretty high-risk surgeries with low probable outcomes, taking a nerve from somewhere else in the leg and transferring it, doing physical therapy, doing my therapies, doing everything I could, but it just was not moving. After a shock of a fall and a trauma like that, it's not uncommon to be prescribed some sort of anti-inflammatory like prednisone, a steroid. And I was given that. And, you don't want to take those if you don't have to, and you don't want to be on them for a long time. And I found myself on it, going into a second month, and it was just the inflammation was not going down, which the doctor were a little puzzled with. So my inflammation markers were way up, and that was really prohibitive of whatever healing was going to happen. And so I was really, really motivated. What else can I do? What else can I do to bring inflammation down? What else can I do? What else can I do? And I started bumping across, at first was just like, diets of cutting things out, like cutting out a lot of plants, or switching over from heavy carbs to, fats as a fuel, things like this in terms of being less inflammatory. And I had a hard time with it. It didn't fit with my understanding. There was a real cognitive bias that I had, and it was really substantial. But I kept on coming across it, and coupled with being really motivated and willing to try anything, I did. And once I set my mind on something, I can be pretty disciplined with it. And I know diet can be a really tricky thing for a lot of us, but that part of it isn't. The psychology of it was, but the actual flipping the switch toward it. So I just did it, and I cut out a lot of things, and I switched over. I didn't get sick or anything. I didn't suffer some of the things like some people transitioning, burning sugar as a fuel versus fat. But immediately the inflammation went down. I mean, within 2 or 3 days. Wow. And that shocked me. I mean, I was on a powerful drug, and it was not doing anything. And that led the way for me to start getting a little bit of incremental, movement back. I couldn't really move the arm, but I could get in like a pool, and the weight of the arm was too heavy for the lack of, neural functioning that I had. But in the pool, I could lift the arm up. I could make the arm weigh an ounce, and I could lift an ounce. I might not be able to lift a 10-pound arm, but I could lift an ounce, and then I could start building from there. Yeah. And so that was my main goal. And I was just trying to heal this injury. And I'm a physical guy, and to lose your arm, that's really, really tricky. So I was very motivated there. But one of the things that I've suffered with, and it runs in my family, my father, my aunt, my sister, my grandparents all had migraines, serious migraines, and I started getting them in my late 30s. They've been getting a little bit more frequent and a little bit more intense as I've gotten older, a progressive thing. And I have been really trying to figure out, ways around that, and, doing detailed, journaling on, like, what I might have eaten. I had maybe too much dark chocolate, or I had this as a trigger, or too much sunlight, or not enough sleep, or, it was really, really, really hard to trace these things down, but I was really motivated. I also have in my family the genetics for Alzheimer's, and my father passed away of Alzheimer's. and again, runs in my family, grandmother, and all those things. I think there's a link with these types of neurologically driven migraines and neurological Alzheimer's. And so one of the things that I started to just inadvertently notice as I switched over to this way eating to heal the arm, right, to get the inflammation down, was I realized that a month had gone by and I hadn't gotten a migraine, and then another month and another month and another month. And these migraines were getting progressively closer together. It could be 2 weeks, could be 3 weeks, but it was somewhere like that. And, when I would document them, they would be almost always what I would call a 9 or a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. They'd last about 3 days. They would be really, really, really painful. It just feels like you're getting brain damage. I mean, it's that kind of, it feels like a trauma in your brain. And it's just so registered really, really high. And so I was really shocked that the only thing that I had done differently was, this less inflaming way of eating for me. And, when you start thinking about it a little bit more, migraines can be driven from a number of different things, but inflammation is a huge one. And that must have been one of the things that was going on there. So that really, I would say the migraine thing was the thing that kept me on that longer. I was just thinking temporarily bring the inflammation down, heal the body, and then move on. But why would you move on from back to something that now you have evidence that is inflaming for you? When I look back, I can see the gut inflammation that I had. It wasn't bad enough to have to really go, but I mean, after just about every meal, I would feel lethargic. There would be bloating. I'd feel uncomfortable. If my girlfriend wanted to walk after dinner or something, I needed to wait a couple hours. I can't go walking. It just doesn't feel right. Yeah. And this is like eating, organic, salads, vegetables, things like this.
So it sounds like you were doing everything that you're supposed to do, and you are still not feeling or getting the benefits that are out.
Right. Yeah. I think if the gut thing had got really bad,
right,
like formally into irritable bowel or SIBO or something like that, I think it was a leaky gut now. And I think some of the stuff that gets leaked from that intestinal wall does get into the bloodstream, and we do have evidence that does pass the blood-brain barrier. So it's causing all kinds of systemic inflammation. Those things do not need to get out into the open. This isn't really the body, that GI system. It's a void in the body, and that stuff should not be leaking. So I think that's part of what was going on in terms of my understanding of it. But I just haven't come across many things in life that have flipped a switch like that. Many things that you can do are like marginal gains. They're oh, this is a little tweak that really, really helps in this thing, or in this thing or in this thing. And I think that's the way most of the things that I've stumbled across are, and they're immensely valuable, especially as you put them together and you compound that over a lifetime in terms of wellness and health and living a purposeful life, whatever that might mean. But this was one of those things where it was a real big switch. And, it still surprises me 5 years into it, like how powerful it is, how deeply it affects the human system, because there are just so many, and you could listen to a lot of other people talk about their stories in this. And I know that's part of what you're doing with this podcast. But how many different things it affects.
Yeah.
So that's usually an indicator of like how systemic it is. I mean, just weird things like the energy level jumped up, I'm physically active. I would recover faster. Like I just recover faster from everything that I do. I sleep better. Sleep has always been a kind of like tricky thing for me, very light sleeper. But if that's not right, boy, I can count on some bad things happening, especially in the past with the migraines. Um, just all the body composition changed, not so much the body weight, but the composition. I certainly didn't have a weight problem or anything like that, but I noticed without changing anything else, the muscle tone went up and the body fat came down without doing anything else. Really interesting.
Yeah.
And, you know, those things don't drastically happen, especially as you get older. And, you know, for a male, anabolically, we're different. We don't produce the same hormones that we used to when we were younger. And it's harder to put on muscle, male or female, as you do get older. But that was just organically happening. Really, really interesting. So when big drivers like that kind of flip around, it just, you know, it just puts an exclamation point on, okay, this is a better way of eating and going about food. I think the other big surprises were, again, I always have thought of myself as like pretty disciplined with food, but when I started cutting out like the carbohydrates, I did notice that there was like, I don't want to use that word lightly, but there was an addictive quality. I never felt full when I'm eating carbohydrates. I could easily overeat them. But with you know, fat and protein, they're so satiating. They're so um, uh, probably giving the body what it really, really needs, that you can't easily overconsume them. And especially protein. But if you eat the two of them together, they're just super satiating compared to carbohydrates or sugar. So that's one of the big things that I noticed, like um, how addictive that kind of was for me. And you know, again, psychologically, that was a little bit harder, even though I find, you know, once I switch over to something, it's pretty easy discipline wise to do that for me. And I know that's not easy for everybody. And it might not even be the optimal way. You know, changing slowly may be a more adaptive way. The body tends to do well. Organics tend to do well. Biology tends to do well like that. We're not machines, but I didn't have any like sickness or anything like that. I didn't have any like keto flu or any of the it could have triggered a headache or something like that, but it really didn't. It was the opposite. It kind of dismantled those things. So I think one of the things really, you know, up in the chain of command of what's going on here systemically is inflammation. I think for me, it really, really dropped those numbers way down. And then you have all these secondary and tertiary things that happen off of that. So, yeah, you know, cutting back to the past, you were interested in some of the past stuff. I think some of the things, I know some of the things that got me into thinking about, like, you know, creating my own sense of agency in terms of wellness. Early on, just having a lot of challenges. I was in leg braces and all through elementary school, like the famous character in the movie Forrest Gump, right? Those leg braces. And then when I got out of those, I was in a body brace. I had these big, big, giant curves in my spine, 50+ degree curves. Ended up breaking my back from that disorder. And I had some learning cognitive difficulties with some pretty severe versions of dyslexia. And then the migraine stuff and just a lot of unwellness stuff that kind of like pushed me in the direction of like, oh, I'm really, really motivated to finding answers or finding ways to kind of reel this in. So that helped me a lot. I mean, I remember feeling like what I thought an old person was at a young age.
Mm-hmm.
You know, especially with a lot of the body stuff, I was kind of hunched over, and I was in pain consistently from 8 years old up. I don't remember not being in pain. Some days the pain was worse than others, but I was always in pain somewhere in my spine. And there's a lot of arthritis in my fingers and my spine, and my even my feet were all like claws like this.
Wow.
And so you know, I remember seeing, I remember particularly visualizing and seeing an older man passing me in the road, and I was kind of hunched over and grimacing, and he was hunched over and grimacing, and we didn't really say anything to each other, but I thought, oh my gosh, I'm like an old man, you
Wow.
know, I'm an old man. Um, and I remember calling myself that for a while. You know, you create language that's not healthy, and
Mm-hmm.
kids help you at school when you're different and you have leg braces and body braces. They help you with some of those names too. Those are really, really horrible. Um, and, you know, I just, looking back from my perspective now, it was a lot. I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but it did change and it shaped me. And I feel the opposite of an old person now. And I don't know what you're supposed to feel like, but I just feel stronger, more energetic and healthier and more cognitive. And you know, I'm not in my 20s, but I feel better than I was when I was then at
Yeah.
that age. So um, these are some of the things that really, really helped me. But as it relates to this um, this podcast, I've been shocked in terms of how much um, uh, how much this has impacted me. Um, Everybody's has to figure out what works for them. And when I switched over to the ketogenic diet, and I was, you know, starting some of the testing to see kind of where I was with that, pretty quickly I learned that I could get away with a lot more protein than probably the average person and still be ketogenic for a lot of the time, and that worked a little bit better for me. Um, so I am a higher protein keto in that ketogenic, and very, very low carb. There might be, you know, negligible 0 to 20 carbs a day. That's very, very little. I eat predominantly animal products. I eat some macadamia nuts, but outside of that, it's uh, you know, grass-fed meats, lamb, bison, um, cow, um, eggs, wild-caught salmon,
Yeah.
cod, some of the smaller fatty fishes, pasture-raised chicken, turkey, that type of thing, sheep, uh, yogurt, goat kefir. That's about it.
Yeah.
That's what I eat, and I just kind of mix that up, um, you know, a few times a day, 2 or 3 times a day, and it'll be a variety of those different things, and that's that's the best fuel that I've ever found for me. That's kind of where it is. Um, but it kind of started from that kind of general. Let's start with a lot of fat. Some of the things that won me over to at least even try it was recognizing the diet was designed and had a lot of real research. When you get into food research, we really don't have research. It's you know, survey studies. It's not real science. But ketogenic diet is one of the rare ways of eating that they actually have a lot of research on, because we didn't have many ways of treating epilepsy. And it was very successful, but you had to really be on it for the average person, 70%, 75%, 80% fat, that's a pretty up to 90%, I guess, in some of the cases. But it really changed the quality of these young people's lives to kind of do that. Like epilepsy, some migraines, and some of these other neurological disorders have similarity. And so that kind of made sense, like what this might be doing. But again, I think we might be looking at maybe some inflammation, at least in my case, that might be doing something there. There may be some other things going on. Metabolically, the brain is a pretty interesting area, and I think that that metabolic thinking around and running off of derivatives of fat, ketones, is probably a pretty big game changer there.
Right.
You're probably looking at people, and I have seen genetically where I do have a glue transporter disposition, where I don't do well with glucose as well. So it's easy for the brain to get in a position where it's under fueled. Ironically, even in the state, maybe especially in the state where you have consumed a lot of carbohydrates, it can actually do something weird like that, where the brain registers, I'm not getting enough, and then it can send into a migraine, for example, or a seizure or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that looking at the way the brain metabolically deals with these different fuels and what is more optimal is really, really interesting. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot more information coming out of it, as it bleeds out into things that I don't have direct experience in, but some of the things that I know you've worked and been motivated to kind of work on any number of these brain dispositions or even psychological ones. At least the way that we viewed them in the past, we're starting to see that a lot of them are a bit more kind of organic than psychological. So really, really interesting, but they certainly play off of each other. But real fascinating stuff. Is really interesting.
Yeah, and what I love about your story and about the diet is the wide aspect of influence and how extremely efficient it can be when nothing else seems to be working, and it's just a dietary intervention. To me, that's such a tool really to have available, that I feel like we should be screaming through the roofs for people that are willing to look for alternatives, people that are trying what they're prescribed but it's not working. And to me, I was really fascinated by your story and the amount of challenges and like the real struggle that you went through, and where you were at and where you are now, just by making that one change, and the amount of like snowball effect. You just said like inflammation, reducing inflammation, and how that impacted so many other areas, starting from your arm issue, starting to heal better, migraines, such a big topic and a huge challenge. 9 out of 10, that's serious. It's not a joke, but that was affected as well. So you mentioned that sleep got better, your exercise started to recover more. I mean, that's a wide area of influence that we don't necessarily have one pill that can affect so much and in so profound way. So I just love the fact that this is this one solution, right? A diet, which in your case helped with so many things, and in my case, it has been extremely beneficial for mental health. But just the fact that that's why I'm interested in presenting different stories that are testament to how efficient it can be for even different things. It's not a solution for one specific diagnosis. Even when we say mental health, I don't think it's just for bipolar, right? Like it could be so many things in it, like OCD, depression, and schizophrenia, and the list goes on and on. But the bottom line is coming back to reducing that inflammation, increasing energy levels, and honestly, from what I'm hearing from you, is like getting a huge up level of your quality of life, really, which is what
Yeah.
we all can benefit from.
If I'm curious, have you noticed like just a multitude of things? I know you were really motivated to treat something that was really,
Yeah.
messing with the quality of your life, but did you notice that it radiated out to other things too that seemed to be like not really associated or connected with? Didn't make sense?
I mean, for me, the most profound effects outside of the mood improvement, which was obviously my biggest challenge back
Yeah.
then, even just for that, I would keep the diet going just because it was so helpful. But I experienced energy levels like never before. I just felt naturally waking up with just being energetic. I never had that throughout my whole life. Even if I get enough sleep, sometimes 8, 9 hours, I would still wake up and just be drowsy, just not feel very like energetic and obviously optimistic. Never so much. So the energy level, the quality of sleep, and the mood improvement, that was such a powerful, trio that got affected, that it just had this snowball effect on everything else. It's literally the quality of my whole life has improved. But and without any side effects, right? For me, it's just how can we treat the root cause without necessarily damaging something else, right? Which seems to be the case with this diet and not so many other options that are available there.
Yeah. No, I just, my experience is, I mean, it's weird to even talk about some of the little peripheral things. It's because
Yeah.
it's the big things are so profound. But when I take them all together, it just seems weird. So if I throw out a bunch of these little things, they're just bizarre. Um, so for example, I mean, as weird as they are, I used to sneeze like, and I sneeze really, really loud. It's really dramatic. And I used to sneeze multiple times a day, and people would make fun of me because it was really, really loud. It was just, something that people identify. I might sneeze once a month now. I just don't sneeze. Weird. Have no
Yeah.
idea what's going on there.
Yeah.
Another weird thing, just weird, like earwax. Get normal amount of earwax and have to clean it out. Don't get any earwax. I don't have any of that. I used to get residue on the tongue. Don't get any of that. My gums used to bleed. That doesn't happen. Just all these like weird little things. If I heard somebody saying them, I would think it's a little bit more magical thinking or, something. But I don't know if these things are talking about, well, you bring down inflammation and the body is just, it's stronger immune system wise. It's not like
Yeah.
overreacting like a chronic sneezing. It's, you're not creating as much waste, and maybe these things aren't happening, maybe underlying things that were causing some gum disorder or whatever. I don't know, but there's so many seemingly unrelated things that it is bizarre to me.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah. And
it
I
I,
just love it.
I rarely say anything about those things if somebody asks like why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's like those are just some of the things that I've noticed. So
There's some
um,
bonuses out there. As I mentioned, like we will do it for one thing, but everything else that comes with it, it's like welcomed, obviously. And
so
so
you have noticed some like smaller. You mentioned some big things like energy level is a big thing, mood is a big thing, and
I mean,
especially
for
with the
me,
things.
this intervention really set the foundation for now a whole different lifestyle.
Yeah,
It just affected me on so many levels that my life view became different. The mental aspect was a huge, like just having better mood, more positivity. Now that affects everything else I'm going to do in life, the way I think, the way I show up. I go for bigger opportunities, or I go for a run a lot more regularly. It doesn't have to be a hard push anymore. It's not so hard. Like it actually feels I'm energetic
right,
enough. I can
right.
enjoy it. So just that itself is huge. So the way I would describe it for me is that keto enabled me to really be in charge of my life the way I want to and do all the other things. Like, I still call it like a keto lifestyle because it enables you to do everything else, like the stress management, breathing techniques, meditation, all of the things that before were such a hard work to do because of the lack of energy and just the brain fog, the negative depressive states of mind, all of that. So, yeah, as a summary, I just love how powerful it is on, and just like having this amazing array of benefits across so many things. But like, I would call it literally a life upgrade, like the whole life gets better, which is why to me it's something that we got to talk about and share our own experiences. I'm not so interested in the medicine versus what another human being is experiencing and what their body is signaling as symptoms, as improvements, the things that you're mentioning. To me, that's a real testimonial to how effective it is and that it's good for you. Something that makes all the benefits that you're talking about and helps you feel the way you feel compared to where you were at, can, to me, cannot be my point here is I wouldn't wait for the FDA to approve it, right? If I'm seeing other people that are experiencing the same thing, I think our body is the best doctor, the most reliable one, and the cues it gives us are invaluable. There is no better coach or doctor or prescription than something you do and your body responds well to. So I just admire you, and I want to acknowledge you for all the challenges that you went through. To me, that was so inspiring to see how motivated you were from not being in a good place, but really looking for solutions and doing the hard things and eventually coming to the other end of it. I think that's a real success story that's inspiring and can really help other people that are struggling, because when we deal with some serious health issues, it's very challenging to imagine ourselves doing something, especially a dietary change. For a lot of people that's challenging, but I've seen, and for me too, is that when you're motivated enough, what you're getting out of it is better than what you're giving up as far as those dietary changes. That's when you really go for it and you appreciate it and you love it, because it's helping you on levels that you couldn't, for me, like I couldn't even imagine. And you are another example for that. So what are your thoughts about the future, and how do you see yourself with the diet? Can you predict any downsides to it, if we want to be objective? And like, do you see something that maybe nutrition deficiencies, or I don't know, anything that may be coming to mind? Do you have any hesitations that it may not be something you can sustain till the rest of your life? Or how do you feel about the future and the diet and your health?
Yeah, I think it's important, especially if you're going to make a big shift like that, something that, you know, really affects you in a lot of different ways, to, try to have a good relationship with your doctor or seek one out, and, continue to get at least annual blood tests. Um, when you make big shifts like that and you're not doing it in a transitional way, there may be some kind of bumps in some areas, but look out over the longer term, and try to work with maybe a younger doctor or one that's a little bit more up
Okay.
on some of the newer research. There's just so many things in terms of like this type of diet where you are exposing a lot more towards this fuel source rather than this one, sugar versus fat. You're gonna have more lipids in your bloodstream. You're just gonna have more in that. But the latest research really decouples a lot of this. I don't know what to call it, but this villainization of fat over the last 40, 50 years, especially. And there's a lot of really nefarious stuff out there in terms of how we got there, how, you know, we came to prize package grains versus fat as your main fuel source. And we switched over to that. We did. And we built food pyramids around them. And, as sad as the American diet tends to get picked on, when we built that food pyramid, there's a lot of evidence that Americans did that. They moved more and more towards that. And at the same time, though there's other confounders out there, at the same time, every number went in a bad direction. That it's normal that 80-90% of us are metabolically not right.
Right.
That's almost all of us.
Yeah.
That's not just oh, I'm getting older and I'm getting a belly. That's a lot of things. Now, I think with people that are a little bit more fragile from the baseline, or fragile, in our brains or whatever, we're like canaries in the coal mine. I don't know if that saying means anything to you. I know you're not originally from this country, but we're the early warning system.
Yeah.
Because we will fail sooner. Somebody that inherited a little bit more health, they can take a lot more damage. But if you've got a weak link somewhere in you, and it will show up a little bit faster. So I mean, that's one of the ways that I think I've grown to appreciate some of the things that I kind of have had to deal with at a pretty early age. And I wouldn't want anybody to suffer like that. And I wouldn't want to go back and do it. But at the same time, I mean, it's shaped me, it's changed me, it's really made me not take things for granted. And when I have been able to have some successes, to really, really be grateful of those. They're not things that I take lightly.
Yeah.
And having that sense of agency, that you can control your own life and you can live in a more functional way, and be happier and surprise yourself in a lot of different ways. I just don't take that lightly. So it's I wouldn't change it. When I think of like what it took for me to kind of stumble across something like this, I think one of my thoughts and concerns about the future or other people coming across it, even though there is more popularity towards it, it's a really, really hard thing to switch gears like that for most of us. And food is tied into it. It's not just my individual taste or whatever. There's familial aspects to it. There's cultural aspects to it. You have your foot in two different cultures at least, right? And eating in a different way, and it's not easy. And you don't want to be a stick in the mud. You don't want to be an outlier in your own family or these things. No one that's sane wants to be an agitator like that. You want to fit in. It's something that brings us together. And there's so many things tied to it. And it's also very satisfactory. And it's, some people maybe quite possibly in an over-reliant way, over-rely on eating as a coping mechanism and a de-stressor, and it's my pleasure reward, and it's really tied into the reward system for sure. And so we can get I guess my ramblings, my point here is it's a really difficult thing to kind of come across. Like when I think about how I tripped into it accidentally, and then came against a wall, and I'm pretty disciplined, but I still came against this wall of disbelief. Like, there's no way that, this can do that. There's
Right.
no way that this is better than eating, plant and carbohydrate base. There's no way. It doesn't. I just went against my belief system. Almost, it made me confront some of my thinking in almost a religious way. Like I was holding on to something like a religion, that it didn't require any science. It's just belief. I believe it because I believe it. That's why. You
Yeah.
know, I had to face myself with that because that's what I was up against. That was the hardest part for me.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think you were lucky that you saw improvement so quickly. You said like after 3 days or so, you noticed the marker improving. And that's, I feel like if
yeah,
someone can get to that point where their body is signaling that they're feeling better, there is nothing that can stop them from moving forward. But for so many people, it takes a little bit longer. And what you're talking about, just that shift in beliefs, I also struggled with the same thing. I've always been on a low fat, and just the idea of high fat being healthy, it took me
yeah,
months to mentally conquer that
yeah,
idea and believe it and and be okay with it. But obviously, once you do the transition and you see that there is, to me again, there is no better proof than how you feel. And if you feel better, now nothing can put you off the diet, because what, again, you're feeling better. Nothing tastes better. No carbs or foods can taste as good. And so many people share the similar challenges that you were talking about, that it's just hard. It's the social aspect, family, friends, they don't understand it. It's like stigma around fat. They even think it's bad for you. And so many people don't go there just because of that social factor.
right.
But I think that's starting to change, and the more we talk about it, the more people get the insight that it's probably something that they can change and do for their own selves. Obviously, we don't have control over anyone else, and it all comes down to how motivated are you to get better and to try
Right.
um, things that are different. And it's not
Right.
easy by any means. Is it worth it? It absolutely.
I think that is the best example. You're right. Like so many things, like the person, the people are the embodiment of that, and
Yeah.
that might, you know, encourage somebody that's ready. Not that we're trying to sell any type of diet, but I think we are trying to sell, if you are suffering or things aren't going in the direction you want, there may be some real options that you have that don't require a prescription, that don't require a surgery, that don't require this, like, well, you're just getting older, it's going to suck, you know, that
Right.
don't require those kind of buy-ins, right? So I think that is, you know, what we're selling. I
Absolutely.
think one of the things on a particular note, when I am asked about, like, okay, well, what are you doing? What's going on there? And some of the, you know, some of the pushback, and it's some of the pushback I had too. Like, so in the way that I'm eating, there's virtually no fiber. There's
Okay.
there's
Yeah.
no fiber in the diet, and that's like, well, that can't be good. You know, no fiber. How do things even work? The quick answer is they work way better than they ever have. Um, and you know, it's fiber. I, I think it's a little bit more in the, if you are eating a lot of carbohydrates, you do need fiber. You are going to need those things. You need it to kind of slow down the blood sugar, you know, absorption, so that you don't get some radically unhealthy spikes. Uh, you know, I think you kind of need it for a number of different reasons, just to kind of past what I think those secondary fuels are, those survival foods are,
Mhm.
um, through the body. But we don't have the kind of guts for processing those things. We can't absorb fiber. We can't break it down. It's not, we're not a cow. We're not a ruminant. We don't, you know, we can't get stuff out of that. And I think it is harsh on the system. I think fiber probably was the thing that was causing a lot of gut damage for me.
Mhm.
Um, uh, there are a number of situations where, in the medical setting, they do cut out all fiber because they know it is deleterious on the small intestines, especially, but also the large intestines, and cutting that out for a period of time. But you know, as soon as you're recovered from the surgery, then you're kind of back on. Um, I'm just kind of throwing out some thoughts here. I'm not,
No, that's an
you know, I'm not
amazing
an
point.
expert
I
in any
know.
of that, but
I
it
know
is
that many
something that I
people.
get, some, well, like, how are
Yeah.
you getting your fiber? Well, I'm not eating carbohydrates. I don't need the fiber. The fat and the protein, that's going to take care of itself. And, you know, perfect, healthy digestion system. It works
I love it.
better than ever,
Yeah.
so.
And it's yeah, that's the other thing. It's a big topic, and a lot of people that have never even heard about this theory about metabolic health being, centered around animal products get so scary. And the lack of fiber, I think, is a big one, but you kind of explained it really well. But I also think, in spite of what we were aiming to kind of provide as far as information to others, and the history of this diet. So obviously it ages back to how we evolved and what we ate at first, right? As paleo people, and like all those theories around it. So it's nothing new. And for me, it has been very interesting to find out that the ketogenic diet has always been effective for seizures, right? And for many other things, like back 100 years ago. But just because it was not as easy to maintain, they started not offering it to people and instead providing medications. So medications are definitely an option. And I think choosing that more holistic way is not for everyone. It's not definitely for someone who wants to initially be comfortable, get the results right away, not implement change, not going through that even phase of a little bit of self-doubt. Is it going to work? How I'm going to feel? The transition period. I know you mentioned for you it wasn't hard. You didn't have any flu symptoms. But for many people, especially when they come from the sad diet, it can be challenging. Yet the ones that are super motivated and really have invested, they want to invest in their health. I would not see anyone who should not try. At least try and see yourself. Your body will tell you. As I think we're so bio individual that I think we can only trust our own body signals. And in cases when they are positive, profoundly positive, I would not think of anything better. It's just such a sustainable alternative tool that can be, sustained lifelong, it seems like. So for you, the plan is to stay on keto for for the rest of your life, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Is that it? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, after any kind of like efficiency curve, after you kind of get past some of like, oh, okay, what do I do? What can I eat? And your mind gets a little bit more comfortable with it, and your body. Um, I don't see any downside for me. It's so much easier. It's so much healthier. It checks so many different boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see switching back again. One of the things that just my curious mind has looked at, like trying to understand some of the sciences, like certain types of anthropology that study the history and what people probably ate, pre us civilizing, 6, 7, 8, 9,000 years ago, in terms of you know being on the farm and civilizing and things like that, and growing grains and moving a little bit more towards that model. Every evidence is, when they do testing on earlier Homo sapiens, if we talk about you know uh, agriculture and things like that, it's a relatively small time scale, a short time scale. It's not that much for a topic like adaptation or evolution, or our systems kind of evolving. That is what we were how we were living and what we were eating specifically for hundreds of thousands of years before that. And all the big evidence points to at least 80% of our diet was animal.
Yeah.
Now, there's ethical things around that people get stuck on, and I know I've struggled with those things too. But if you just kind of take that away and just think in terms of like, is that the case, that's how we got here? Every every organism has a specific diet that they eat, a specific range of healthy things that they eat. And if you go into a zoo of all horrible places, there's a diet for a gorilla, there's a diet for this type of, and if you mess with that, the animal has bad effects. And trying to figure out what ours was, and it's more like this. It's more like what we're talking about. It was probably the single biggest driver that had us migrate and, populate across the planet and, live in places that seem like, really, could we live in the Arctic? Could we live in those places? And yes, 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 whether we're following coastline and eating primarily, fish animals, or just following herds of ruminants and extincting many of them, a lot of the big game. I get the ethical, challenges that some people have, and certainly it was part of the vegetarianism and veganism. I get that and understand that, but I think you have to start with a healthy human being is the first thing that you want to think about. And then how do you kind of work off of that? And I think when if I'm such an animal rich diet, how do I kind of work with that? Regenerative farms is that's what I go to. I've got a handful of sources that I go to. Nowadays, you can kind of get stuff shipped to you, frozen or whatever, but it's wild caught. It's, regenerative farms, these farms that are, it's a different subject, but yeah, most agriculture, doesn't, whether it's animals or plant-based, it is really, really, really wrecking a lot of the environment, not just animal agriculture, plant-based agriculture. It's horrible for the soil. It's, monocropping, all these different things. You want to go against that. I don't buy from those institutions. I don't eat those things.
Yeah.
And so regenerative farms is the way to kind of go, and it checks a lot of boxes for me in terms of that. Places like White Oaks Pastures or Force of Nature, or there's just a number of these different sources that these farms that you can kind of get from, and they'll ship right to you. It's just really convenient and very high quality and good for the environment.
Yeah, and I think that also so many people would argue that the quality of the meats and the animal products were back then, as we made that kind of analogy, is not the same nowadays. And I think what you just spoke of is the alternative. Like, we still have better options. Obviously,
right.
The processed meats that are full of antibiotics and they're treated are not the same quality as they should, and they wouldn't serve us as good. But there are still options that we can do, and what you just talked about.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Hormone-free, antibiotic-free, grass-fed, grass-finished. Those types of things are what you're looking for. And again, they have to come out of these systems where the farm is treated like an ecosystem, and the soil is one of those things that's regenerated instead of just completely depleted and then chemically adulterated, and then we're getting our food from it's a pretty big problem, the food system, for sure. For me, one of the big checks too is what I notice is it's such a nutrient dense way of eating. I don't mean just calorically or otherwise. I mean like nutrition wise. It's so dense and loaded. I think one of the false notions out there, they call these things superfoods, or they have all these different nutrients. There's no way of eating veganism and getting everything that you need. There's no way of doing that. You can do that with animal sources. That's
Right.
a pretty big indicator of like what we need. Um, Other animals, can produce these things like B12 or whatever, or have less of a need for iron or whatever it might be. So it's such a nutrient dense way of eating.
Mhm.
I eat a lot less. It's just you eat, I'm satiated, I'm full. My grocery bills are less. It's not more, it's less.
Yeah.
Um, I don't have my metabolism on every waking hour. Really, really important.
Yeah.
You know, all those things, when you put them all together, they do synergize and add up. That's probably what you're seeing as some of the positive effect here. So, yeah, it's just there's just more there. So it's denser, it's richer. You don't need to be as consumed by it, and you don't need to consume as much of it.
Yeah.
And so there is a sense of less is more there for
Absolutely.
me.
I think that's another point that people think always, and that I see as a counterintuitive, that they think that all this premium quality or grass-fed meats and just going keto or like keto carnivore or whatever it is can be more expensive. But the first point I would say is like how much it costs you to stay on this unhealthy diet to begin with, without even the financial aspects. Just if you're not
Right,
eating well,
right,
I mean, just that, the cost of
right.
that. Let's consider that first. And then second, I agree with you. It takes a little bit to get there, but initially people are scared. But when you eliminate all the junk food, I think that's another aspect of keto, right? Like the amazing benefits that obviously it's a nutrient dense and rich type of diet, but it does not let you consume all the extra processed, ultra processed, like carb sugary foods. That is another benefit. It's just like those two work so well together. You're eating good quality, nutrient dense food, and you're not eating all those like ultra processed foods. And it can come
Yeah.
at a very reasonable price. You are now able to, what you brought up, not eat all the time, which is something we are used to hear a lot as a positive, which is not necessarily the case. And again, we're speaking of our own experience, not necessarily making any other point than what we found with us being on this diet and how we felt.
One of the things that I think it's hard to explain, but it 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 was a big thing, so I think it's worth taking a stab at. Is I recognized like how much I was putting on food in terms of this pleasure vehicle too.
Yeah.
This, and I know it's really hard if someone's listening in terms of like, again, that's one of the places where I get a lot of pleasure from. I I have since turned my thoughts and feelings into, I don't think that that's healthy. I think there's plenty of places where there needs to be positive reinforcement, pleasure, and all those different things, and getting your dopamine and all the. I don't think we should over rely on food for that. I think food should be a little bit more, utilitarian. And I know that's a really tough thing to sell because there are a few things that someone could get excited about. But it's not that I've tried to decouple my excitement from food,
Yeah.
or eating, so to speak. It's like if I'm eating with somebody, it's about the eating with somebody. It's not the food.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's not that I don't like the food I'm eating, but it feels like it's a much more appropriate, like
Right.
they're appropriate and healthy feelings in terms, instead of like how an addict responds to their thing. There's never enough. There's an overdoing.
Yeah.
It's asking too much from too little. It needs to be my fuel. It needs to be my building blocks.
Yeah.
And I need to be grateful for it. And I need to enjoy what I'm eating. But beyond that, I think when someone starts to make some changes, a lot of what they come up against is actually an addiction.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's highly addictive. And in our defense, we have seen, especially over the last 50 or 60 years, I mean, most of the scientific power that's gone into foodstuffs has been on the corporate side of things, trying to figure out, like, how do you get the consumer to eat more of this controllable commodity? How do you do it? And they've learned that if you use, vegetable oils and sugar and salt, if you can do some combination of those three things, there's nothing more palatable and there's nothing more addictive. When I say addictive, in terms of at least the dopamine,
Mm-hmm.
it's higher than cocaine
Mm-hmm.
when you combine those things right. So, I mean, can you open up a bag of chips and not eat the whole thing? They used to advertise in some of the commercials that you can't just have one, or you can't just have one bag or whatever. That wasn't just some jingle. They knew you couldn't.
Yeah.
They know it. You can't do it. It can't be done. It's designed that way. And so some of this is really, I mean, I hate to just say it's, nefarious or evil or something like that. It's simply consumer based. It's
Yeah.
simply like, we have a product, and how do we sell more of our product? Well, let's make it more desirable. Let's
Yeah.
make it more addictive. And we have spent lots of money on figuring that out, and we've got it down. We've got it down. And I think that's what a lot of us are contending with. Now, those things, animal products, it's hard to make much of a profit with those things.
Yeah.
They're and they don't have much of a shelf life. They're not going to have a barcode, you know, stuff that I can put in a box and it can sit there for a long time. That's a good product.
Right.
Uh,
Right. Yeah. Profit over
and
health,
then you
isn't it?
add these layers of, these industries getting huge, like Kellogg's or whatever. And then they are creating a lot of the nutritional studies that's
Right.
passing as science out of institutes that have been captured, unfortunately, like Harvard and Tufts, these big New
Yeah.
England universities, at least those departments are really very, very questionable as far as what they're doing and how they've kind of sold out, how they're bought and sold by an industry and how that passes as science. Um, when you combine those types of things, you can see that it's a really big problem. It's a tricky problem. Um, and yeah, but it starts with one person. It starts with people getting to a place where, wow, this is not working for me, and I kind of make some changes.
Yeah.
Um, but I think, it's hard in a time where more and more people might register as being more stressed, and then they need their thing that makes them happy, or they're unhappy, and
Yeah,
so
I
you
think
get an
that's a
even
really,
bigger.
really big piece. Definitely one of my biggest challenges has been the food addiction, the eating disorder, relying on food way too much for things that I think you said it brilliantly, like asking for too much from something that can give you only this, like you can never get enough of something that almost works. And it's a horrible cycle to be in where you're relying on food to give you those feelings of pleasure or stress relief or escape from life, whatever. There are so many, it can fit in so many purposes, but it's never sustainable. And it's another big challenge for people to just discontinue. And I see it over and over again. They just don't want to cut off. It has been the case for me as well. Like if life is so stressful that this oftentimes is the only thing that is accessible, relatively quick, and just does hits the spot temporarily, never works in the long run, but it's hard to give it up. And it has truly been my biggest, absolutely biggest challenge. However, I think it really comes to a point where we take deeper dive into life. What do we really want? What do we value? What we're ready to give up, or to how do we invest in a better health, in a better future where we feel really satisfied? Because you're gonna do that enough times to be absolutely sure it's not working. So if it's not, how can we face it and look for alternatives that are more effective, that are just sustainable and do not do all the damage and addiction and all the, the dark side of that, because it can be quite hard to handle, and I'm saying that firsthand. However, there is more research coming up for specifically the ketogenic diet and its effects on eating disorders. I think a bigger piece with that is going to be still the mindset and digging deeper as to what one really values, what they really want, moving towards more fulfillment and meaningful relationships, and looking for pleasures outside of food, really. And
Yes.
valuing
Yeah.
food, as what you said, as a source of fuel, not as a, and it can absolutely be enjoyable. Everyone that I talk to, I share that unless you enjoy the diet, I don't think you're gonna stay on it, and it doesn't have to be the case. You can absolutely enjoy the animal foods, and you can be looking forward for your steak and creamy broccoli that could easily become your newest treat. But it's a process. It's going to take some time until your taste buds and palate adjusts. But there comes the time where you're looking forward, you're absolutely enjoying. And I find it nowadays easier and easier to even dine out, or the society being accepting of it. Of course, some will challenge, but can we just stick our grounds and do what's best for us in first
Yeah.
place, really?
Yeah. I have sympathy for that scenario that I think a lot of people find themselves in. It's a full life. There's some, there's a lot of stress. This
Yeah.
is one of my, if not my main source of pleasure. I could be doing a lot worse things like over drinking or,
Mm-hmm.
other things. Um, and, don't take this away from me, that type of thing. I completely get that. But it's, in my experience, it's one of those things that it's not like that at all on the other side. It's not like
Mm-hmm.
something has been taken away, although it sounds like on the outside, it sounds like it's a really, you know, um, repressive type thing. I'm taking something away. It's much more of a gain, it's gaining and it's readjusting. Again, what I think from this perspective now was an inappropriate relationship with food. It might be nuanced and semantics here, but yes, enjoying the food and being grateful for it, but I am not relying on it for some sort of dopamine hit or pleasure reward, or there are places for that. And ironically, I feel like as I'm functioning even better than ever now, I'm able to afford more appropriately in those other places, like investing in more quality relationships or, moving on from ones that are not healthy. And,
I love that.
uh, whether it's in your work life or in other parts of your life, there's other pockets that are appropriate to get those things. And ironically, again, this way, any movement towards something that's healthy for you affords more of that, allows you to do that. And you can kind of do that in a healthier way out there. But I think it is part of the problem to not examine that inappropriate philia, love for food.
Yeah.
That's not right. I don't think that's good. I love food. That's not good. That's dangerous. That's like an addict lights up when they talk about, you know, uh, over an inappropriate sex or over an inappropriate drug use or
Yeah.
alcohol or whatever it is. Don't take that away from me. Don't take my wine away from me. Don't take my ice cream away from me or whatever. And on the other hand, I understand it's a stressed life. There's some unsuccesses going on there, and I can't do anything about these complicated problems. I understand that that is not an easy thing. And at the same time, I think there is a better way, and trying to find your pace and moving towards something healthier. It doesn't have to be like anybody else's pace, what worked for them. You know, when I'm describing myself and my personality and my life journey, I was open for as far back as I can remember, towards instruments that were going to help me get the most out of an imperfect hand. You know, I was unhealthy. There was a lot of unwellness. I grew up with siblings and they were like super healthy, never sick, athletes. And then there was me in some sort of like contraption or sick or not leaving the house or what. The contrast was just really, really stark. And for me, that shaped some of my mind towards like, I'm really motivated to looking for answers, looking for anything that can kind of help me. And so I was constantly primed year after year after year to explore, creatively think, be a little bit more open to different things, try them out, and eventually, you know, move towards a healthier and healthier version where, you know, now most people and all my people in my family think I'm the healthy one, because we've all gotten older and they are older and they have all the normal old people stuff going on with them. So, you know, that it's funny how that happens. Not, you know, not any type of weird comparison thing, but it has, you know, that way has kind of shaped me little bits at a time. But this has been one of those things that's really shocked me, really surprised me, and really empowered me. But it's shaken up my thinking. Um, so yeah. And, you know, people like your stories too, they at this point, they help reinforce, you know, that that direction that I've been moving in. But in the beginning, you know, hearing some of these stories, I didn't know exactly what to do with them other than just really questioning, like, you know, diet's not going to pull that many levers. It's not going to. And that the way that these stories were just kind of bouncing around towards, it wasn't just one thing. It was all these different things. I really, you know, I really that didn't compute. It didn't make
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
But some of it just doesn't make sense until you start experimenting and you start getting the subjectiveness of like, oh my gosh, I feel better. What's going on here?
Yeah.
So, and I know people feel like that as they switch over to certain diets. I remember, you know, growing up and as a teenager switching over to more of a vegetarian and then a vegan diet from a regular sad American diet. And there was plenty of processed food and just not really high quality. And I remember feeling better at that point too. So you can feel better from where you're coming from. And I think one of the things that some of us can get stuck on is it's amazing, you know, evolutionary. What got us here is we can kind of adapt to something. It'd take a long time before nutritional deficiencies show up. I was really scientific about that vegetarianism and veganism. I was really aware early on that I needed a lot of protein. I knew that. I had already discovered that. And so I was mixing things and trying to get the right mixtures of these amino acids and these, and I was doing all these different things. We didn't have a whole lot of information about like, you know, different qualities of proteins like we do now, or things that kind of disable your assimilation of certain things, whether they're minerals or, like, you know, okay, you eat spinach, whatever. It's got some calcium in it. It's got some iron in it. It's considered in terms of a plant-based, you know, high iron source, which is a joke because, you know, high iron sources are animal products. But anyway, for a plant, okay, it's got a little bit of iron in it, but it also gets, you know, blocked by the calcium. You can't get to it. I mean, so with animal sources, you use just about everything that you consume. With plant sources, you can't. You can't, because we can't get at most of it in that fiber matrix or some of these phytonutrients or these anti-nutrients, these
Yeah.
phosphates, oxalates, things like this, tannins, all those different things will block at best some of the absorption of these minerals or amino acids. And at worst, they can cause irritation or inflammation or things like this. I think that's what was going on with me. There was a lot of that, especially with the raw. For me, it was like this logic of vegetarianism and then veganism and then raw food. And I was eating mainly raw food for a very long time. And I think that was especially problematic. But yeah, I said a number of different things there, so I don't know what the original thread was, but
Yeah.
I think you kind of have to find your path with it, and if you're open to kind of like, maybe there's more that I can do for my well-being. I think that's something that's coming into a lot of people's awareness, whether they've had a bout with a hospital or a doctor or not. Most people, when they're first stumbling across having to deal with the medical system, recognize there are great people out there in the medical system, but the system itself, I mean, you need to take care of you. You need to take care of yourself. You need to do everything you can. And the best taking care of yourself are these things that you do in your life, these regular things that you do, these habitual things that you do, like eating, like lifestyle stuff.
Yeah.
It's hard to turn that around. And especially if somebody is, 40, 50 pounds overweight, and you've described how it's like you just had to will yourself to doing certain things, just, energetically to just do that. It's hard. And imagine having 3 kids and trying to do that and being a single mom and, being in this dead-end job or feeling, the weight of the politics in your country weighing on you, or any of these big stressors. I understand that, and at the same time, all the more reason to find your pace but move in that direction. Your pace but move in that direction, little steps, in your direction.
It's not
Every
so
culture's
much
got that wise saying, little steps, right? How do you say that in your original language?
małki stopki.
So they have that saying that's just one step at a
Absolutely.
time.
Yeah.
It's just a fundamental, and we have to remind ourselves of that, because a lot of us get stuck in like, I can't completely overhaul my life and I have to change my work and change all. You don't have to do all those things. And for some people, it looks like this. Some people, well, what can you do? Can you keep on moving in that direction? And then maybe you get a little bit more energy. Maybe you get a little bit more wellness, and maybe then you have more to kind of like adjust.
Yeah. And so the
Keeping that
little
moving.
change feeds off to better results, and it gets easier.
Right.
But it's, as you said, I cannot agree more than it's more important to move in the right direction, even if it's slowly, than moving quickly in the wrong direction, period.
Right.
And that
Right.
personal responsibility and taking charge and exploring what's possible, even when it's challenging and even when life is not cooperating. I think that's when we need it even more. And if we take the initial steps, it somehow gets better. But it's important to do something about it in order to get there. So Chris, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time here and your open share. I think there is so much value in your story and your experience. It has been my personal inspiration to listen to you, to see you where you are today. Like you look healthy, your energy, you're just a really success story about how can you completely take charge of your life and change it completely and end up being so much better. I just love that your family now thinks of you as the healthiest. I absolutely
Yeah.
love that. And most of all, I love that you feel great. I think there is
Right.
no
Right.
better win than that. So again, I really appreciate your time and sharing vulnerably, openly, and just your tips and your experience. I'll drop a link where people can connect with you if they have some other questions, I think many people can relate to that, and hopefully you will inspire someone to take at least the small step, and hopefully eventually completely improve their life and change it for better. So thank you so much.
Great, great.
Great.
Well, I love being a part of it, and good luck with this. I think you're in the right direction, and I know I'll see you soon in one of our keto meetups.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Take care.
Thank you.